Sometimes exes come back. But the scary thing is not their return, but the fact that they may come back with weapons in their hands. On January 18, 2014, a young couple holding hands walked out of church. It was a bright day they had been looking forward to. The many people attending the service were still inside the church. The man and woman hurried to their parked car to grab boxes of toys and gifts for their young daughter, who was waiting for them at the church. But the subdued January silence was struck by loud pops. One, a second, a third. The young men fell like dolls whose batteries had died. Scarlet pools of blood filled the asphalt around them. A few minutes later, the emergency services received a call that 2 people had been killed in a parking lot near the church. People ran out at the noise. General outrage and shock grew in the roll call of the crowd. A little girl who had not received her presents cried from the panic that gripped her. She, like other parishioners, heard the sounds of gunshots, but did not see the full horror of what had happened. Police arrived at the scene and taped off the area and examined the scene of the attack. When emergency ambulance doctors arrived, they were left with only 2 deaths. The victims were young married couple Nathan and Krystal Maddox. We're going to start at the beginning together. We'll take a look at the lives of our heroes and go into detail about the situation they found themselves in, and also be sure to discuss whether such a tragic end could have been avoided. When lies, betrayal, greed, fear, and darkness become an integral part of someone's mindset, it causes them to commit horrible crimes that no one could ever imagine. In fact, an entire family can be drawn into such crimes, causing many worlds to fall apart. Our story features the brutal double murder of Nathan and Krystal Maddox. So now, if you are interested in learning all the minute details of this case, let's get started. The events of this family send us to Texas, the small town of Combsnale in Tyler County, a town so small that with a population of 563 people, people know each other by sight, and some of them have started families and become relatives. Nathan and Kristen's relationship was very fast-paced. Young people lived on neighboring streets, lived together the first love and the first kiss. The girl's parents did not approve of her choice, and in every possible way prevented their relationship. Kristen could not cross her beloved parents and refused her love, but fate presented a surprise, and Kristen learned that she was expecting a child. Parents had nothing left but to accept the situation and let the lovers get married, because it is unworthy to look in front of people as a single mother. Nathan and Kristen got married in Texas, and soon after the wedding they got a house and had their first child, a daughter, Madison. But family life turned out to be far from the fairy tale story from the movie. Nathan had to work hard to support his family. Having a house and maintaining it doesn't come cheap, so Nathan was forced to take a job away from home. He traveled to Montana. A young husband and father, he tried to visit Kristen and Madison as often as possible. He often sent money home to them, and for the most part, Nathan was pretty sure he had a happy family waiting for him at home. And that seemed to be the case. He loved Kristen, he loved Madison, he thought they had the perfect little family, until one day he came home from Montana. When he walked in the door, he noticed right away that the house was empty. Most of the things inside the house were gone, and there was a note on the kitchen table. In just a few lines, Kristen cruelly informed him that she was leaving Nathan. The reason seemed strange. The woman wrote that she didn't know where her husband was missing, who he was with, or when he would return. She wrote that she was unhappy, but that was a lie, because Kristen knew perfectly well that Nathan was in Montana for work. He called all the time, asking how she and her daughter were doing, what they were doing. He sent them money on a regular basis. The worst part of this episode was that she took Madison with her, and Nathan is now banned from seeing his daughter. Kristen did a very mean thing. She went to the police station and used false information to gain full custody of her daughter, indicating that her father was not providing for or interested in the child. Nathan knew that the ex-wife and daughter had returned to his parents' home. He repeatedly tried to see little Madison, but the Westfall family was adamant. They were jubilant that they had managed to get rid of an unloved son-in-law. Time passed. Nathan returned to his hometown to be closer to his daughter. He did not give up trying to see her, but he knew that it was necessary, with the help of a lawyer, to obtain official custody of his daughter and to achieve legal meetings. During this difficult period, he meets Krystal. They'd known each other since childhood. They went to school together. When they were teenagers, their paths diverged. Krystal went to the big city. She dreamed of graduating from university, but in her last year she got married, and instead of a successful career, she got a happy family life, in which 4 children were born. But unfortunately, after a while, the relationship between the spouses went downhill, and they decided to divorce. In 2011, Krystal and her children returned to her hometown. 2 longtime friends met each other at the most necessary moment for each of them. Nathan was enamored with Krystal's children. From the way their mother interacted with the children, from Krystal's inexhaustible energy that lit up everything around her, like a fairy with her optimism. In 2013, Nathan and Krystal were married. Nathan worked at the Lakin Industries warehouse, while Krystal started a small clothing business, opened a children's clothing boutique under her own name, and handmade jewelry. The family's business was doing very well, and it became feasible for them to hire a good lawyer to get a chance to see Nathan's daughter from her first marriage and try to get custody. Madison was thrilled with her daddy's new wife and the siblings she had. The girl was completely happy in her father's home. This made Letha and Paula Westfall, Kristen's parents, completely resentful. They were very afraid of losing their only granddaughter. Back in 2012, Kristen Westfall, with the support of her parents, applied to the court for full custody of her daughter. The custody battle dragged on for a long 2 years. The Westfall family had hoped to get full custody very quickly, but Krystal's arrival in Nathan's life changed the whole picture of his existence. A full family, a home, and a good job made a strong case in court, and Nathan was granted visitation rights with his daughter. He was very happy and prepared to take his daughter away for the day. In October 2013, the judge allowed Nathan and Krystal to have supervised visits with Madison. On January 18, 2014, Nathan and Krystal arrived at Mount Carmel Church for Sunday service, after which they wanted to go for a walk with 6-year-old Maddie. They left the church a little earlier than the rest of the congregation to retrieve pre-prepared gifts for Madison from their car. Just a few steps later, 3 loud pops were heard. Nathan and Krystal were killed by fatal gunshot wounds to the head. The small town was shocked by the gratuitous execution of a young married couple. But as it later turned out, there was a reason after all. But why take 2 people's lives, so brazenly and so brutally? The police arrived on the scene and meticulously investigated the scene. Nathan and Krystal had been shot in the head with a .30 caliber rifle, which was found at the scene along with .30 caliber shell casings. An autopsy later revealed that Nathan had also been shot in the thigh with a 20-gauge shotgun, leading investigators to assume that there were 2 shooters, as it is obvious that one person cannot shoot and reload at the same time. Investigators conducted a series of interviews with witnesses to gather information about the Maddox family and build their picture of what happened. They interviewed parishioners, acquaintances, and relatives of the slain family. But what surprised them most was the reaction of Nathan's ex-wife's family. Kristen and her parents were called to testify at the police station, as were the other witnesses. The further behavior of this family caused great surprise to the investigators. The Westfalls played up the tragedy too much, trying to hide their joy at the deaths that had occurred. Paul Westfall was so shocked that he went into a seizure, so much so that he couldn't believe the news of Nathan's death that he had to call emergency services. A grown man who had spent years trying to rid himself of Nathan's presence in his daughter's life was so upset that he had a seizure. Kristen was the first person interviewed, and her interview was a little creepy. She was the only one of the family to maintain a very calm and natural demeanor, despite the fact that she and Nathan had been together for a long time and had a child together. Kristen continued to give some really weird details about him, trying to bring out only the negative aspects of her ex-husband. She reported that she knew who killed him. In Montana, Nathan was listed in dangerous motorcycle gangs. One day, one of the gang members showed up at Nathan's mother's house and threatened to kill him. This story checked out, but it remained an empty threat because of an accidentally broken motorcycle, and the gang itself turned out to be a common exaggeration to confuse the investigation. Also, as an alibi, Kristen said that on the day of the crime, she was at the grocery store with her father Paul, a couple miles from the church, after which they both went home. Surveillance footage at 10:57 a.m. confirmed their presence at the grocery store. Paul Westfall told the exact same story, but Paul was a hunter and had a firearm in his arsenal, so his hands were tested for traces of gunpowder, but the result was negative. But until now, his reaction to the death of Nathan, whom he sincerely hated and never hid it, seemed to the investigators very strange and played. It left a sliver of doubt in his sincerity. Interviews with loved ones, over a short period of time, helped investigators discover that Nathan Maddox was involved in a custody battle over his daughter with his ex-wife, Kristen Westfall, and her family. After a long and bitter dispute in court, he was close to retaining custody, something that none of the Westfall family members strongly wanted. Such a desperate battle between the parties may well have been cause for reprisal, but the police had no concrete evidence to arrest any member of the Westfall family. The family consisted of 4 people, and 2 people were the shooters. Investigators had yet to be convinced of their story and figure out which family member pulled the trigger, taking the lives of 2 people, or whether a hired killer did it. The investigators took a different path and decided to act through the main protagonist of the controversy, little Madison Maddox. After all, her safety was at stake. She continued to be with a family that could pose a threat to her. Police officers, along with Child Protective Services, CPS, came to remove the girl from the home, but faced a wave of protest and rage. The behavior of the older Westfall family entailed a search of the home. What the police later found in the house shocked them. A gun was stored on a shelf in an easily accessible place in the room. The culmination of the search was the illegal drugs scattered around the house. It turns out that in 2013, Kristen Westfall was charged and arrested for possession of a controlled substance. The arrests were repeated, which clearly indicated that Kristen couldn't be a good mother to Madison. When Kristen went to jail in early 2013, her parents were granted temporary custody of their daughter and would not allow Nathan to see her while their granddaughter was in their custody. However, despite Child Protective Services prohibitions, Kristen continued to live in the house with her young daughter in the same room and slept in the same bed with her. Even in 2014, with the injunctions in place, Kristen continued to live with the rest of her family and had daily access to her daughter, despite being ordered by the court to move. After a search of the Westfalls' home, where a used syringe with residue of illegal substances was found on a dresser and a gun on the nightstand next to Kristen's bed, little Madison was taken into temporary custody, and additional evidence found led to the Westfalls' arrest. State authorities wanted the girl placed in foster care and said they found supplies for illegal drugs in the Westfalls' home, as well as a gun on a nightstand within easy reach of the girl. Child Protective Services was involved in the Madison Maddox custody case. In March 2014, less than 2 months after the tragic murder outside the church, authorities made 4 arrests. Kristen Westfall, 29, her younger brother Cameron, and her parents Paul and Letha Westfall were arrested. There was no direct evidence of their guilt in the Maddox murder. Cross-examinations didn't produce the desired result either. So the police had to go for a little trickery to put the squeeze on the most vulnerable member of the Westfall family. That was 18-year-old Cameron. He was told that if proven guilty, all members of his family would face life imprisonment, and the direct killers would face the death penalty. Cameron was young and kind-hearted. He was very scared and quickly agreed to cooperate with the investigation, revealing all the details of what happened. The crime against the young couple, Maddox, turned out to be carefully pre-planned by the family gang in order to permanently exclude Nathan from the role of father. Shortly after the shooting episode, it was revealed that Nathan and his ex-wife Kristen, with the help of her family, had been secured a nasty custody disagreement over their 5-year-old daughter Madison. The long and costly legal battle was to end well for Nathan, The Westfalls were concerned and carefully plotted a scheme to remove him from Madison's life. Nathan wanted to take care of his daughter alone, but the Westfalls were not interested in letting her go even to see her father, let alone give him the girl permanently. The Westfalls were very hurt by the fact that the former son-in-law had settled down in life and was living a good life. Thus, when the judge allowed him multiple visitations, it became obvious that he could win the trial, which led to Kristen coming up with an original idea to get rid of him once and for all. At first, Kristen tried to find someone to kill her ex-husband. When that failed, she and her father decided to do it themselves. On Sunday afternoon, the family often attended church, and the day of January 18th was no exception. Letha Westfall and little Madison drove to the appointed time for the service. Afterward, she had to hand the girl over to her father. In the meantime, Kristen and Paul went to a distant store and posed as customers to get on CCTV cameras to create a solid alibi. But they miscalculated the timing. Each family member had their own responsible role to play. For the entire interval, they communicated by text message, updating each other on the Maddox's movements. Letha, who had attended the service, informed Paul as Nathan and Krystal prepared to leave the church. She also called 911 immediately after the murder. Cameron took an active role in concealing the evidence. He discarded the gun used after his sister and father shot the newlyweds in the head near a remote church. He drove to a lake where he discarded the bag of weapons. Cameron soon agreed to cooperate with authorities and revealed that Kristen originally came up with the idea and the family went along. He also pointed out to investigators the location where he had discarded the murder weapons. Divers later retrieved said items, which confirmed Cameron's words. The police detained 29-year-old Kristen, her brother Cameron and her parents, Paul and Letha Westfall, and charged them with organized crime. Thus, Kristen and Paul pulled the trigger, with Cameron and Letha acting as willing accomplices. Given that Letha was at the church at the time of the incident, it was obvious that she was not responsible for the shots that killed Nathan and Krystal Maddox. However, phone records showed that she was responsible for informing her daughter and spouse of the couple's whereabouts, and that she informed them as they left the church. While Kristen and Paul were the ones who fired the bullets, Letha and her son Cameron participated in the crime intentionally. The trial was very loud and lengthy. Each member of the Westfall family was tried separately. Paul Westfall continued to act out his seizures, so he was found mentally unfit and remained in a state psychiatric hospital for a while for evaluation. In May 2014, a judge found Paul incompetent, but that verdict was overturned 4 months later. With Paul and Letha facing the death penalty for the murders of Nathan and Krystal Maddox, they had little choice but to agree to a mutually beneficial plea bargain with the DA's office. To avoid the death penalty, Paul was forced to take a plea bargain with the prosecution. He pleaded guilty to the charges and thus was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Letha also took a plea bargain with the investigation. Instead of going to trial, she pleaded guilty to participating in organized criminal activity. Letha will not be eligible for parole until 2046. She is currently incarcerated at Mountain View Prison in Gatesville, but will be eligible for parole in 2044. At the time of sentencing, Letha Westfall was 54 years old, so she will likely die in prison. Kristen is the third member of the Westfall family to stand trial in this case. Throughout the entire court hearing, Kristen pleaded not guilty. To all the accusations against her, she replied that her whole family was crazy. She was the only one who was sincere about it. When her entire family, Letha, Paul, and Cameron, came to the trial and testified against her, she couldn't say anything to their faces. In August 2016, the final trial and sentencing for Kristen Westfall began. The motive for killing Nathan and Krystal Maddox was custody of Madison Maddox. Kristen adamantly did not want Nathan to see Maddie whenever he wanted. She did not want to give him the privilege because she could not see him happy. She wanted to control her daughter and father's communication herself, and through the child, she wanted to control everything he did and everything he felt. The trial took over a week. In the end, with overwhelming evidence against her, it took the jury 8 hours to find her guilty of capital murder. In a Brazos County courtroom, attorneys and the judge considered final motions for the woman. Kristen was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole nearly 9 months before her father pleaded guilty and received an identical sentence in May 2017. Kristen Westfall is currently incarcerated at the William Hobby Women's Prison in Falls County, Texas, while Paul, Letha, and Kristen Westfall were ultimately charged with 2 counts of murder. Officials only charged the youngest member of the family, Cameron, with 2 counts of tampering with or fabricating physical evidence. Cameron Westfall pleaded guilty to 2 counts of third-degree tampering with evidence. The judge deferred sentencing contingent upon Cameron Westfall testifying against his family. He faced up to 10 years in prison on each charge. It was reported that he had nothing to do with the actual shooting, and that his mother was also not involved because she was at the church when the crime occurred. However, phone records show that she texted her husband and daughter as the Maddoxes were preparing to go home. Currently, Cameron is incarcerated at the Huntsville Correctional Facility in Huntsville, Texas, where he is expected to remain until his expected release date in 2025. Cameron was very indifferent to the crime, and he really had nothing to do with the crime, as he claims Paul allegedly just happened to come home, handed Cameron 2 guns and told him to throw them away. But the investigation didn't rule out that Cameron knew a little more than he was saying. After all, Cameron lived in the house with his family, and he simply couldn't have not heard about Kristen and Paul's plans to kill the Maddox family. And if he was an unspoken witness to the plot, after all, why didn't he go to the police or even try to stop his family? So ended the story of a double murder at the House of God in a close-knit community that shook the entire state of Texas to its core. Recall that on January 18, 2014, Nathan and Krystal Maddox were shot and killed right outside the gates of Mount Carmel Baptist Church near Colmsnew. After waiting for a legal and supervised visitation with his 5-year-old daughter from a previous marriage, it soon became clear that the girl's biological mother, Kristen Westfall, and her entire family, brother Cameron and parents Lloyd Paul and Letha Westfall, were behind the crime. This case was complicated. The community demanded justice. Lloyd Paul, Letha, and Cameron Westfall made a deal with the investigation. After agreeing to testify against his sister, Cameron took a plea bargain. He pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, 2 counts of tampering with or fabricating physical evidence. In 2016, a judge sentenced Cameron to 10 years in prison, and his mother received a life sentence. The following year, a judge sentenced Lloyd Paul to life in prison. He avoided the death penalty by pleading guilty to first-degree murder. Under the plea agreement, he would not be able to appeal the sentence. The crime family's protagonist, Kristen Westfall, received a life sentence without parole. In a fateful decision by her mother, Madison Maddox lost her father and will likely never see the grandparents who cared for her and perhaps even loved her. Time after the Westfall family was sentenced, the legal battle for custody of Madison Maddox continues. Nathan Maddox's father, Jim, has since filed a petition to become the primary guardian of his granddaughter. A huge number of people die in custody battles every year. Most importantly, the children are not made happier, but orphans with psychological problems. All the people in the town were devout, went to church, and they're also easily killed people. Covering themselves with concern for the girl, the older generation of Westfall fulfilled the wish of their daughter and helped to commit this terrible crime. What were they hoping for? Based on the story, Nathan was not a bad or mean person. He loved his own daughter and strove to be a good father to her. Obviously, in addition to the custody battle, the hatred associated with the fact that the girl's father had created a new family, was able to pick up his mind, and started a new life without crime comes first, and was perfectly happy with the new woman, having something he didn't have in his past relationship with Kristen. That's what was causing all the negativity from the ex-wife, and she was able to turn her entire family against him. If it was just about custody, they wouldn't have killed Nathan's new woman, and that's probably true. After all, the Madison custody dispute started before Nathan and Krystal's relationship. There is certainly only one loser in the history of the Westfall versus Maddox fight. Of course, it's Madison. I'd like to believe that when she grows up, She won't remember the wild selfishness with which adults tried to take advantage of her by saying words about love. After all, if the family had loved the child, they would have tried to build a normal relationship for her sake. But they were only acting to please their own egos. This is not a story about Romeo and Juliet. Have you ever noticed how many worthy, talented, and magnanimous individuals pass away young? Some people, barely crossing into their 20s or 30s, leave this life suddenly. It often seems like there were no signs of impending trouble. They lived, worked, and planned for the future, just like everyone else. However, misfortune, illness, or criminal acts disrupt the usual order, and so those who once showed great promise and were intelligent and determined are now gone. In an attempt to find solace, or due to helplessness in the face of the situation, it's often said that the heavens take the best. This same tragedy struck Jamie and Peter James. None of them could have imagined the horrific ordeal that was to come, to bury their beloved daughter. Unexpected news. On October 26, 2023, around 4:30 a.m., the principal of St. Andrew's Cathedral School, located in central Sydney, sent out an email to all students' parents. It stated that the school would be closed until the end of the week due to a critical incident. 2 hours later, worried families received another notification. The administration assured that none of the students were involved. However, the news was unsettling, especially since it was later clarified that this directive did not apply to graduating students taking exams. For those distressed by the situation, psychological support was made available. Soon, a round-the-clock consultation center was set up in the school library. On Thursday and Friday, the school building and surrounding area were thoroughly searched by forensic teams. Access to the gym was restricted, and the adjacent shower area was slated for demolition soon. So what terrible event had occurred within the school walls? A corpse in the shower. Around midnight on October 25, 2023, the body of a 20-year-old woman was found. She had last been seen alive at 7 p.m. The water polo coach had entered the gym's shower and never came out. Surveillance cameras recorded someone following her. Around 8 p.m., the pursuer left alone and headed towards the school exit. The woman's parents were the first to raise an alarm about her disappearance. Lily had been uncontactable all day, and at 10 p.m., she sent a message asking to be picked up from work. Fortunately, the police, already informed about the situation, took care of it instead. The night guard, making his rounds, witnessed a horrific scene. A woman lay in a pool of blood on the floor with a shattered head. After recovering from the initial shock, he called emergency services. Later, detectives invited a family friend for body identification. The woman's face was so disfigured that it was hard to recognize the once beloved Miss James. After the news of her death reached the public, her home was filled with people. Friends, neighbors, and acquaintances came to support her grieving family. Local residents also expressed their sorrow and respect for the prematurely departed, continuously bringing flowers and toys, turning the area around the house into a memorial. Yet this mysterious death was not the only intrigue in this case. Another tragic loss. On October 27th at 8 a.m., just 11 miles from the scene of the first crime, the remains of a man were discovered. This grim find was made by vendors working nearby. The body was located on the rocks of Diamond Bay Reserve, close to Vaucluse, an eastern suburb of Sydney. After a call to the police, a rescue team was promptly assembled. The operation included a bomb squad, Marine Corps, and a rescue helicopter. At 3:30 p.m., the man's body was retrieved and taken to forensic experts for identification. Due to the injuries sustained from a high fall, visual inspection was not possible, so fingerprints were used for this purpose. At that time, experts suspected the identity of the man. However, confirmation was needed for certainty. Eventually, the man was identified as 24-year-old Paul Thiessen, who was suspected in the crime against Lily James. Investigators had a challenging task ahead: to draw parallels between the two fatal incidents and to uncover what had happened between these individuals a few days earlier. A diamond among the stones. Lily was born in the last spring month of 2002 in the coastal town of Sanssouci, New South Wales, Australia. She was the first and cherished child of the close-knit James family. She was especially adored by Barbara, her maternal grandmother. Lily spent her childhood with her younger brother Max by the ocean. She was very active and enduring, with a passion for swimming. Her father, who coached the water polo team at an Anglican girls' school in Hurstville, supported his daughter's interest. Friends recalled that she was sociable and friendly, excelled in her studies, and helped those who were struggling. These qualities endeared her to many, ensuring she was never alone. In her upper school years, thanks to her achievements in academics, sports, and community life, she was recognized as one of the best students. Whatever she took on, she succeeded in. Her incredible talent to excel in all areas of activity was undeniable. She also had an interest in the dramatic arts, which led her to participate in the theater and dance club. Over time, the talented young woman was noticed and invited to participate in the famous Woodford Folk Festival, one of Australia's largest annual events, attended by around 125,000 people, including local, national, and international guests. The event usually takes place from December 27th to January 1st, marking the New Year's celebration. With a broad selection of genres and styles like circus, cabaret, comedy, street performances, workshops, debates, and more, Lily chose to perform a unique rendition of a monologue from William Shakespeare's Macbeth. During the performance, her skills, natural charisma, and allure were fully displayed. Receiving unprecedented applause and approval from the jury, she secured second place in the theater category. This was a true success and a great boost, as our heroine not only gained recognition, but also a significant monetary prize. In 2018, the young Miss James added another achievement to her collection. She passed her beginner's driving test. Her athletic successes deserve special mention, too. Following in her father's footsteps, she began to pursue water polo professionally. The athlete earned the title of swimming champion in the under-17 category. Understandably, her parents were thrilled with their daughter's successes and celebrated each accomplishment grandly. By her senior year, Lily had definitively decided on her future life, focusing on a sports career. Thus, in 2020, she enrolled at Sydney Technological University to pursue a bachelor's degree in sports business management. A fateful encounter. At the beginning of 2021, a new chapter began in our heroine's life. To spice up her college routine and gain teaching experience, she took a job as a water polo coach at St. Andrew's Cathedral School. Thanks to her youth, vibrant personality, and love for sports, she quickly connected not only with her colleagues in administration, but also with the group she was entrusted with. The students were drawn to her, striving to match her standards. In turn, she tried to find a unique approach to each student and highlight something special. It was during this time that Lily met the new cricket and hockey coach, Paul Thiessen. With his professional skills and striking appearance, he quickly caught the attention of those around him. The ambitious young man, in addition to his main job, also taught part-time at another educational institution and was a member of the University of New South Wales hockey team. Paul was undoubtedly popular, especially among female audiences. However, opinions about him were mixed. Some described him as proud and headstrong, while others noted his positive traits. Initially, the interaction between Lily and Paul was friendly and limited to mutual greetings. However, it later developed into something more. Lily's friends shared that one day the young man asked her out on a date. Given Paul's dazzling smile, it was hard for her to resist, and she agreed. The date made a strong impression on both, and they decided to meet again. Unaware of whom she was becoming involved with, Lily, due to her own kindness and openness, fell in love. It seemed that Paul reciprocated her feelings. He showered her with compliments, gave her flowers, and organized evenings together. At that moment, the young couple agreed that no one at the school, especially the students, should know about their warm relationship. This was a requirement of the school's policy and Lily's personal beliefs. She never wanted her personal life to be public. Therefore, at work, the couple was cautious. However, over time, rumors began to spread. Initially, timid whispers turned into a full-blown public discussion. When Lily found out who had disclosed their relationship, she was deeply disappointed. It turned out that Paul had broken their agreement. Moreover, the way he portrayed his companion led to condemnation towards the young employee. She felt betrayed and humiliated, so she confronted her boyfriend about everything she thought of him and ended the relationship. Later, it was learned that Paul tried to reconcile and repeatedly asked for forgiveness, but Lily was resolute. The only consolation for her was that their relationship was short-lived. During that time, she had seen his true character. Fortune's favorite Paul was born in 1999 in the Netherlands. The Thesens moved to Australia in 2015 when the family head was transferred to a new position. It must be said that his parents were affluent and well-known within certain circles. As an only child, Paul received ample attention and care from his family, which certainly shaped his character. He grew up spoiled and self-centered. The younger Thesen knew his worth, excelled academically, and was active in sports. His impressive physical fitness was immediately noticeable. After relocating, Paul enrolled at St. Andrew's Cathedral School, where he joined the cricket team. He achieved great success, earning recognition and respect from his peers. Over time, he was appointed team captain. He also actively participated in extracurricular activities and festivals, helping with their organization. That's when opinions about him began to diverge. Some boys disliked their overly confident peer who claimed he could win over any girl's heart. However, the ladies found the young man charming and personable. After graduating in 2017, the school administration offered him the opportunity to stay on as an assistant coach for cricket and hockey. He gladly accepted the offer. By early 2018, he had taken over managing these sections. It must be said that he felt confident in his workplace and successfully assumed a leadership position. Eventually, Paul resigned and returned home with his family. The reason for his sudden departure remains unknown. Back home, he decided to continue his education and earned a master's degree in sports management. In a conversation with old friends, he mentioned that he had improved his coaching skills, which soon led to a lucrative offer from his former employer. In early 2020, the doors of the familiar school reopened for him. Upon returning to Australia, Paul met a former friend who suggested they share housing expenses. The young man agreed, finding shared living more enjoyable, even though he could afford to rent alone economically. The rented apartment was located in Kensington, an eastern suburb of Sydney. Initially, the friends got along well, relaxing together at bars after work. However, a few months later, a conflict arose. The fiery Paul decided to live alone. The Thesens confessed that despite being busy and constantly surrounded by people, their son felt lonely. They knew nothing of any romantic relationships, though they suspected he had not experienced serious love interests. In March 2020, an unexpected event occurred both nationally and globally. Due to a coronavirus outbreak, Australia declared an emergency and imposed strict quarantine measures. For 18 months, Paul was left to his own devices, unable to leave the country to see his family due to infection risks. The massive restrictions affected all areas of life, leaving Paul to fend for himself. By the summer of 2021, life had returned to normal. However, it turned out that isolation had impacted interpersonal relationships. When Paul resumed his previous duties, some began to notice changes in his character and behavior. He soon returned to the sports world and became a key player on the hockey team, continuing to lead an active lifestyle. even appearing in match advertisements. At the same time, acquaintances noted characteristics not previously seen in him, such as uncontrollable outbursts of anger. Additionally, rumors spread at the school that he had a particular interest in his female students. The young coach repeatedly flirted with teenage girls, often watching them for extended periods, causing them to blush and feel awkward. Nevertheless, Thiessen continued to be regarded as a significant figure. His performance had a substantial impact on the team's progression to the finals of the Australian Hockey League. Imagine the blow to his ego when Lily ended their relationship. Following Paul's trail. When investigators began probing the case, there was no doubt about Paul's involvement. After the discovery of a woman's body, they quickly got on the trail of the culprit. Surveillance cameras, both inside and outside, played a significant role in this. The young man carelessly appeared on them. Several inquiries were also made to Lily and Paul's cell service provider. The police needed to determine his last known location, so they decided to track the suspect via GPS. They also wanted to find the victim's phone, hoping that the messages it contained could shed light on what had happened. After some time, the locations of the devices were established. Furthermore, by reconstructing the sequence of events, it was discovered that Paul had bought a hammer at a hardware store a couple of days before the attack. Apparently, he was very angry with the girl and decided to confront her in this way. Although her innocence in the situation seemed clear, the sequence of events unfolded as follows. Tragic conclusion. On the morning of October 25th, Lily went to university and then to her job in the afternoon. At the same time, her ex-boyfriend rented a silver Lexus and drove to the school. Since he had no classes, he didn't enter the building but waited in the car instead. After all the students had left the building, the perpetrator walked to the gym. To avoid carrying the hammer openly, he hid it under his jacket. Once at the scene, Paul watched Lily's movements. After finishing her training, she decided to freshen up and headed to the shower. Seizing the moment when she was most vulnerable, the perpetrator followed her. An argument ensued, during which Thiessen attacked her and struck her head. Pathologists confirmed that her death was instantaneous. She did not suffer. After waiting an hour, the young man collected the girl's personal belongings in a backpack and left the building. Outside, he got into the car and drove to Diamond Bay, where he disposed of the weapon in the garbage container. Surveillance cameras recorded him at the reserve at 8:47 p.m. The last known location of Paul, tracked by investigators, was The Gap, a cliff at South Head in Vaucluse, an eastern suburb of Sydney. This spot is known for several reasons. It's not only popular with tourists, but also notorious for numerous suicides. Around 10 p.m., using Lily's phone, Paul sent a message to Mr. James, likely to lead to the discovery of the girl's body. Perhaps he regretted what had happened and hoped she could be helped, or he was simply informing her parents about their daughter's location. They were clearly worried, as indicated by dozens of calls made to the phone. An hour later, the young man made a brief emergency call, but changed his mind and hung up. After that, he made a decision he had been contemplating for a long time. He stepped into the abyss and ended his life. Final clues. Upon arriving at the cliff, police did not find the young man, but they did discover the personal belongings of the former lovers. A rented car was found parked nearby. Everything indicated that the young man was no longer alive. He might have been unable to cope with his guilt, or unwilling to face the consequences of his actions. In any case, the first priority was to locate his body. On October 26th at 9 a.m., police helicopters and boats arrived at Vaucluse. The entire coastline was patrolled, and the area around the cliff at Diamond Bay was cordoned off. However, the first day of searching yielded no results. By chance, the young man's body was washed onto the rocks of the reserve the following day. After an autopsy and examination, Paul Thiessen was officially declared responsible for Lily James's demise. However, It was impossible to hold him accountable, and the criminal case was closed. His body was later given to his parents, who decided not to repatriate him to the Netherlands, but to cremate him and scatter his ashes in Sydney. Farewell. Lily's funeral took place on November 17, 2023, at her former school in Hurstville. About 500 people came to say goodbye to a beloved relative, friend, and coach. At that moment, grief united everyone. The school administration arranged a live broadcast of the ceremony. Notably, the girl's family asked attendees not to wear dark clothes, but instead to dress in bright colors, as they believed Lily would have wanted. She was lively, energetic, creative, and unique, so a somber outfit would hardly have suited her. Many warm and sincere words were spoken about her. In response, the James family thanked everyone who had been with them during those difficult days for their support and help. At the entrance to the building, students and colleagues created a makeshift memorial in honor of their favorite. Flowers and farewell letters were placed next to it. As a tribute and respect, the school's website published a video of Lily performing a monologue from Macbeth. Conclusions. After all the circumstances of the innocent girl's death were established, the school management sent another email to the students' parents. It apologized to everyone affected by the tragedy. The principal assured that the crime was completely unexpected and would not happen again. Understandably, many were concerned that a place where children should feel safe had become the epicenter of a brutal act. The administration urged everyone to see this as an isolated incident and to continue their education with renewed vigor. Later, a meeting was arranged with renowned forensic psychologist Tim Watson-Monroe, who has years of experience in analyzing the minds of both criminals and victims. He was asked to speak about what happened and to analyze Paul Thiessen's behavior. The expert assured that Paul's actions were typical of individuals with inflated self-esteem who cannot accept rejection. He believed Paul committed the act not in a burst of emotion, but deliberately and coldly. He did what he wanted and showed no remorse. When asked why the young man ended his life, Mr. Watson-Monroe stated that the perpetrator wanted to avoid responsibility and shame. Overall, he described Paul as a narcissistic individual with psychopathic tendencies. He also noted that some likened the event to the finale of Shakespeare's famous tragedy, Romeo and Juliet. However, the story of Lily and Paul is distinct from that of the main characters in the play and creates a completely new narrative. Love has no room for pride and lies, much less deceit and betrayal. Sadly, Paul failed to understand this and to appreciate the person who was by his side. By prioritizing his bruised ego, he permanently erased the life of a girl who brought light. At the same time, he caused enduring suffering not only for Lily's parents, but also for his own loved ones. Unfortunately, for the nurturing, care, and attention he received, he repaid them with bitter regret. Unhealthy relationships with a cruel person and a narcissist never lead to anything good. It's crucial to realize this in time and break off such connections before a tragedy occurs. Emotional abuse is typically just the beginning and a prelude to physical violence, which the abuser will use to control and dominate their partner, suppress them, and create an atmosphere of constant oppression and fear. Our story today revolves around a popular Chinese blogger, Lamu, whose tragic end a few years ago shocked all of China. Lamu, a simple girl from a poor family, captivated a large audience with her kindness, sincerity, and boundless love for nature, and met a horrific end at the hands of her once loved partner. The most chilling part of this incident is that the assault on her was broadcast live, and thousands of followers could only watch helplessly. Who was Lamu? Lamu was born in 1990 in Yawa Tibetan and Qiang Autonomous Prefecture, Sichuan Province, China. She was the youngest of 3 children in a very poor family that barely made ends meet. She grew up with her older biological sister and stepbrother in a home shared with their parents and grandmother. Their family collected rare medicinal plants, which they sold in local pharmacies for a meager income. After completing only 3 grades, Lamu had to leave school to work with her family members and help support them. Along with the adults, she climbed high into the mountains, where at certain times and in special places, they could find the rarest herbs and flowers with healing properties. Lamu was well versed in these plants and had a sincere love for nature, admiring its beauty and generosity, and drawing strength and inspiration from the mountains. As social media popularity grew, she created her own account on a Chinese equivalent of TikTok. There, Lamu posted short videos showcasing her daily life, household activities, and the beauty of her native province. She called herself a mountain girl and had a deep affection for her work. Unlike many bloggers, she was not chasing fame. Fame found her. Her audience adored Lamu for her smile, purity, and almost childlike spontaneity. She never prepared content in advance, speaking her mind and feelings, and sometimes singing folk songs while showcasing the mountain landscapes. Lamu never used makeup or filters. Her hands and feet bore calluses, scratches, and scars, visibly evidencing the hard and long labor behind them. Gradually, Lamu's subscriber count grew, and not only locals but also tourists visiting the area began to recognize her. They referred to the blogger as that sweet mountain girl, offered warm words, expressed gratitude for her work, and asked for photos. Lamu was not proud of her fame, but she was delighted that her activities resonated with the audience and brought joy to others. In her youth, Lamu constantly went to the mountains with her parents and older sister, but as her sister grew up, got married, and moved to another province, and her parents, due to age, could no longer climb high or for long, Lamu took on all the work herself. She detailed to her followers the flora of the local area, explaining which specific flowers and herbs had what properties, how to collect them, and how to use them as food without accidentally harming the body. During certain seasons, Lamu could spend several weeks alone in the mountains, gathering medicinal plants. She showed how she set up camps for the night, cooked her meals over a campfire, shared local legends and beliefs, and returned with a large and heavy backpack that seemed to weigh more than she did. But this strong, brave, and hard-working beauty never elicited pity, because she glowed with happiness when engaging in her beloved activities in the mountains, despite returning tired, worn out, and with bloody calluses. Despite never complaining about her tough fate and hard daily labor, Lamu long avoided one topic. She did not discuss her personal life because she suffered for many years at the hands of her abusive husband Tong Li, enduring beatings and humiliations, but she tried not to show that she was deeply unhappy. Who is Tong Li? Tong Li was also a native of Sichuan province, born in 1990 into a simple and quite modest family. His parents adored their youngest son, indulging him from an early age, always striving to spoil and please him. At the age of 12, he quit school and started working as a courier, delivering groceries to local stores. He earned little but kept all the money to himself, not helping his family at all. Even then, the teenager began to show signs of greed, avarice, and narcissism. He believed the world revolved around him, that others owed him, but he owed nothing to anyone. Desperate to become wealthy, he was willing to do anything, even break the law. And that's precisely what happened. At 15, Tong left home, fell in with the wrong crowd, and began dealing in banned substances and petty theft, also dabbling in gambling, and took pride in getting away with it. He aimed to earn respect in the criminal underworld, become rich, and escape the poverty he grew up in. Sometime later, Lee's parents opened their own small spice and tea shop, investing all their efforts and resources into it. The business quickly took off, generating a decent income, and the family soon became well off by local standards. At that point, Tong decided to return home and offered to help expand and promote the family business. In reality, he just wanted to live off his relatives, who worked hard daily. Tong considered himself successful and wealthy. spending money on personal luxuries, boasting to friends about his expensive items, and behaving selfishly, even claiming the store's success as his own. Meanwhile, he kept in touch with local criminals, maintaining a separate under-the-table business with them. First, love. Tong and Lamu met when they were just 17. The young man was so enchanted by her beauty, kindness, and sincerity that he was head over heels in love. He courted her earnestly, giving gifts, and it seemed he was ready to change for her, become more mature and serious and cut ties with the criminal world. The young and naive Lamu quickly fell for his charms, believing she had met her Prince Charming, with whom she would be happy. No one had ever courted her so diligently before, and no one had tried so hard to win her over. Soon, the young couple developed a romantic relationship that lasted almost 2 years before they decided to make it official. As soon as Tong turned 19, he proposed to his beloved, who eagerly accepted. However, their parents were not thrilled about their decision to marry. They tried to dissuade the young couple, believing they were too young to start a family, but the young lovers wouldn't listen to anyone. In 2009, they got married, and the newlywed wife moved into her mother-in-law's house. Lamu's personal hell. Initially, married life seemed quite blissful. Tong tried to be a good husband, left behind his bad influences and gambling, focusing on his young wife and the family business. Lamu took on almost all the household duties and also helped her beloved's parents in their shop. However, it wasn't long before her husband started disappearing with his old friends again. He returned to his unlawful activities, frequently consumed alcohol, and his behavior towards his wife drastically changed. Tong was no longer the gentle, kind, and caring man Lamu had fallen in love with a few years earlier. He became crude, self-centered, and aggressive. He took a portion of the store's earnings from a business where all the family members worked except for him, claiming it as his share, and spent all the money on his own needs, entertainments, and pleasures. The couple started arguing frequently. Lamu tried to reason with her husband, urging him to get his act together, work honestly, quit drinking, and stop associating with people from the criminal world. But Tong wouldn't listen to either his wife or his mother, believing no one had the right to tell him what to do. According to his parents' recollections, conflicts in their home became a daily occurrence. The situation didn't change even when Lamu became pregnant. Her husband continued to vanish with his friends, and when he returned home, he was rough and aggressive. He was annoyed that his wife was now more focused on herself and their future child. He himself, like a child, demanded attention, and during one disagreement, he raised his hand to her for the first time. Lamu was shocked by her husband's action and declared she would return to her parents' home, as she refused to tolerate such treatment. At that moment, her mother-in-law, who had unintentionally witnessed the incident, intervened. She approached her son and slapped him twice, telling him he had no right to treat the mother of his future child that way. Afterwards, the woman convinced her daughter-in-law to stay, promising that it would not happen again. Lamu believed her and decided to give her husband another chance, a decision she would bitterly regret, as it was just the beginning of a real nightmare. From then on, Tong regularly became physically abusive, only to apologize afterward, crying and begging her not to leave him. Each time, Lamu wanted to believe he had come to his senses and would genuinely change, but the cycle repeated over and over. When she finally decided to leave her husband, he threatened to take their son away and do something terrible to her and her parents. Frightened, the young mother stayed, fearing he would carry out his threats. From then on, their child became his main tool for manipulation and blackmail. Lamu told none of her relatives about the nightmare unfolding in her husband's home. Even her older sister, with whom she had been very close since childhood, suspected nothing. In 2012, after a long and severe illness, Lamu's mother passed away, which was a huge shock for her. Her elderly father and grandmother were left virtually helpless, and she found herself literally living between two homes, managing to maintain order, cook, and help with the household chores everywhere. Mountain Girl, a blog as an outlet. Meanwhile, Lamu continued to regularly climb the mountains for herbs to financially support both families. Only in the mountains, amidst the hard work, paradoxically, could she rest, be alone with her thoughts, and breathe freely without fear of her disgruntled husband coming home, causing a scene, and hitting her again. In 2017, the woman gave birth to a second son. Relations with her husband remained strained, and her mother-in-law had long stopped trying to intervene on her daughter-in-law's behalf, though she took on all the care of the grandchildren when Lamu went to work in the mountains. Around the same time, Lamu created her account on Douyin, Chinese TikTok, where she started posting short videos showcasing the local beauty, discussing various flowers and herbs, their medicinal properties, and how to use them. She quickly gained a large following who closely followed her, admired her work, and her extensive knowledge of traditional Chinese medicine. The budding blogger called herself Mountain Girl, and her followers dubbed her the Beauty from the Mountains. Engaging with her audience became the outlet Lamu desperately needed to keep from going insane. Sometimes, she quietly sang folk songs for her followers, and sometimes danced against the backdrop of mountain ridges. She always appeared happy, smiling genuinely, and never once complained to her audience about her difficult fate or mentioned the domestic violence she regularly endured. Divorce and remarriage. In 2019, Lamu's beloved grandmother passed away, and the blogger posted a video for the first time where she was crying, expressing her deep pain over losing a family member. Her numerous followers sincerely supported her, unlike her husband who, instead of showing sympathy, became furious and struck her face because she was sobbing. In January 2020, after enduring another severe incident of violence, Lamu finally decided to leave her tyrannical husband. She took her sons, moved back to her parents' home, and filed for divorce. Around the same time, Lamu recorded a new video stating that for the first time in a long while, she felt calm and confident. In the video, it was evident she tried to cover up a large bruise under her eye with concealer. However, she never disclosed to anyone the domestic abuse she had suffered for years. Regrettably, during the divorce proceedings, the court divided custody of the sons, leaving the younger child with the mother and the older with the father. This decision was a devastating blow for Lamu, and her now ex-husband unexpectedly changed tactics, romantically pursuing her again, proposing they start over and not break up the family. He swore he had realized his mistakes, wanted them and the boys to live together again, and promised to acknowledge all his past errors and never repeat them. For a couple of months, Tong put on the act of a repentant man. He gave flowers, created real celebrations for the family, tried to help his ex-wife around the house, and even joined her on mountain trips, which he had never done before. Lamu's heart softened, and she believed that he had genuinely changed. By the end of March, the couple remarried. Escape from the tyrant. As you might guess, the fairy tale ended as soon as Lamu returned to her husband's house. Tong reverted to being cruel, mean, and selfish, and within 2 weeks of remarrying, he brutally attacked his wife, nearly beating her to death. When Lamu interacted with her followers, he snatched the phone from her hands and hurled it against the wall, shattering it. Then he began to beat her with his fists and feet, giving her no chance to escape. Battered and barefoot, Lamu fled the house and immediately went to the police, seeking protection. But they only took her statement and advised her to try to resolve the family conflict on her own. After that, Lamu decided to hide from her husband in another village to avoid endangering her relatives. Enraged, her husband was ready to end the life of his runaway wife, but did not know where to find her. He assumed she might have gone to her sister's house. He visited the sister's home and began yelling, demanding she tell him where Lamu was. The woman knew nothing about it and asked him to leave. Then Tong repeatedly struck her in the face with all his might. At that moment, her husband was at work, so there was no one to protect the unfortunate woman. She suffered a fractured cheekbone and eye socket, and her nose was broken. After the second victim also filed a police report, Tong was finally held accountable administratively, but he was not arrested. Nevertheless, Tong laid low while the second divorce proceedings were underway, not attempting to contact his wife. Unfortunately, this time around, the court, in dissolving the marriage, left both sons with the father, as the Lee family was wealthy, and money proved to be the deciding factor. The heartbroken mother was crushed with grief. Her close ones urged her to leave the village for a while, fearing the ex-husband would seek revenge and possibly do something dreadful. However, Lamu refused, wanting to be near her boys. 3 weeks after the second divorce, Lamu went to the mountains where she recorded a video of herself singing and dancing. Apparently, this was her way of trying to relieve stress, but her ex-husband interpreted it as her celebrating their separation, which blinded him with rage. Tragic assault broadcast live. On the evening of September 14th, 2020, around 8 o'clock, Lamu started a live stream to chat with her followers. She was dressed in a traditional Tibetan outfit, softly singing folk songs. She put a finger to her lips, whispering that they needed to be quiet because her father and visiting stepbrother were already asleep while she prepared breakfast treats for them. At that moment, a terrible noise erupted off camera, as if someone had kicked the door in. The blogger turned pale, frozen in fear. Her eyes wide with horror, she stared at the person entering, then suddenly jumped up, clearly trying to escape. The tripod with her smartphone fell camera down, but the broadcast continued. Viewers could not see what was happening in the room, but could hear everything. Heavy footsteps were heard, followed by the sound of a liquid splashing on the floor and walls. Lamu started screaming for help. Then her father's voice pleaded with the intruder to calm down and put down the knife. Lamu warned her family that the room was doused in gasoline and begged them to save themselves. A sinister silence fell for a few seconds. Then the click of a lighter followed by a piercing scream was heard. The broadcast cut off as the crackle of flames spreading through the room intensified. Followers were in disbelief, unwilling to accept that they had witnessed a tragedy, with some even speculating it was a cruel prank. Unfortunately, the worst had occurred. Tong decided to brutally exact revenge on his ex-wife for daring to leave him. He rode a motorcycle to Lamu's house, bringing along a canister of gasoline and a large knife. Through the windows, he saw his ex-wife in the kitchen on the ground floor and kicked the door leading to the room. Tong caught Lamu off guard. She barely understood what was happening before she tried to flee, but he prevented her from escaping. Tong doused Lamu with fuel and wounded her with the knife before setting the house on fire. At that moment, her father and brother ran outside, shouting for neighbors to help, but they did not understand what was happening or the seriousness of the situation. As the flames erupted, her relatives rushed back into the house, but the old wooden beams, burning like torches, collapsed, blocking the entrance. Miraculous rescue and battle for life. It took firefighters about 2 hours to extinguish the fire. When they entered, they found Lamu in the room, her skin charred black and in places literally melted and stuck to the floor. Incredibly, Lamu was still breathing, with a faint pulse detectable. She was immediately rushed to the hospital, where doctors were horrified by her condition. Over 90% of her body surface was burned, and her lungs had nearly cooked from the heated air and smoke, but she desperately continued to fight for her life. She was in a deep coma, and her condition was deemed critical. Nevertheless, the city's burn center was prepared to help, but the treatment cost was a staggering $1,000,000, a sum her family could not afford after losing everything in the fire. Then, Lamu's father decided to seek help from her followers. He wrote a letter explaining that her ex-husband had attacked her, attempting to end her life, but she had survived, and doctors held out a slim hope. However, the family simply didn't have the funds for her medical treatment. The letter was posted on her social account, along with a plea from her sister to all compassionate people to help Lamu, providing an account number for donations. The necessary funds for treatment were raised within an hour of the post, and people continued to send money. Lamu was transferred to the burn center where she received the needed care. Her condition was stabilized, and at one point, it even seemed she might recover. However, tragically, after 2 weeks of fighting for her life, her heart could not endure any longer, and she passed away without regaining consciousness. She was only 30 years old. Trial and sentencing. Tong was arrested the day after committing this heinous act. At the trial, his mother desperately defended her son, who had inflicted such cruelty, claiming that he did it out of intense love for his ex-wife and stress from their divorce. Nevertheless, the verdict was severe and just. The court found Lee guilty of deliberate cruel deprivation of life and sentenced him to death, additionally mandating his family to compensate Lamu's relatives for the property loss due to the house fire. Tong attempted to appeal the verdict several times through appellate motions, but the decision remained unchanged. In July 2022, the sentence was carried out. Tong Lee was executed. That same year, 2 years after the tragic event that ended a young woman's life, her relatives rebuilt the house on the site of the burned one and were able to move back in. On the ground floor, her sister set up a small memorial altar with photographs of Lamu. In conclusion, the court left the orphaned boys in the custody of their paternal grandparents. The Lee family remained one of the wealthiest in the village, and the judges believed they could provide the children with better living conditions.